Okay, we are good to go, he says.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here with all of you and all of those joining us online this morning for this Global Digital Classroom webinar event on the topic of agrivoltaics. I'm your host and organizer, Chris Hagedorn, adjunct professor of global food politics at Sciences Po University in Paris, France. I'm a former U.S. diplomat, worked on food security for many years. After leaving the U.S. government, I served for 4 years as executive secretary of the UN's Committee on World Food Security in Rome, Italy, and I consult with Chatham House in London. So let me start by thanking our friends at EIT Food, whose Food Systems Pavilion has brought us together here at COP28 in Dubai. Our shared goal today is to progress efforts to ensure that food systems are fully addressed in the context of their impacts on and their contributions to global climate change and rising global temperatures. Where better than the UNFCCC and the COP to explore the topic of agrivoltaics? That is the co-location of solar PV panels in agricultural production. The beauty of agrivoltaics is that by combining harvesting of sun and food concurrently, we help reduce competition over land use, increase food production, reduce water consumption. We help farmers develop additional revenue streams, and we help mitigate against quickly changing climatic conditions. I've just returned from Strasbourg, France, where a European industry forum for agrivoltaics was held. It was absolutely fascinating and exciting. And while agrivoltaics is generally considered to be in its infancy, so much is happening in Europe, especially France, Germany, and Italy, where development of projects are happening quickly, where laws and regulations are being changed to facilitate the industry's growth, and where both investors and farmers are realizing this is a smart direction of travel for many reasons, not without complications, which you'll hear later. Our objective with this webinar today is threefold. First, we want to spread awareness about agrivoltaics as a solution to multiple sustainable development goals. Two, we want to engage youth audiences in particular here at the COP and also in innovative ways to address real-world climate challenges in terms of energy and food. And three, we want to examine how agrivoltaics might play a role in Africa's development, where energy and food security challenges are significant, but where opportunities for sustainable pathways are abundant. So we have a great lineup of panelists today, who I'm sure you're anxious to meet. These include technical experts on agrivoltaics, a youth leader using agrivoltaic technologies in the field, researchers and practitioners familiar with Africa and sustainable development broadly. We'll meet them shortly, following a very brief explainer video on agrivoltaics, followed by a keynote welcome address by Her Excellency Deputy Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, based in the UAE, Ms. Gauri Singh. So let us watch these two brief videos and we'll move on to our expert panel discussion just afterwards. Please play the video.
Agriculture uses an enormous amount of resources. It takes a lot of water and energy to grow our food. 85% of the global water resource consumption is used for irrigation, and 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to agriculture. At the same time, demand for food is only growing. The global population, currently at 7.5 billion, is estimated to reach 9.8 billion by 2050. We will need to nearly double our current food production to meet that demand. Water, energy, and agriculture are the bedrock of modern civilization. And while many technologies have advanced these components separately, few have aimed to address all three components at once. It is time to step back and reimagine their relationship. Enter agrivoltaics. This new technology promises to improve food production and reduce water use, while also creating energy and additional revenue. The solar panels are placed on the same land where crops are grown, allowing growers to harvest the power of the sun twice. A recent OSU study estimates that converting just 1% of American farmland to agrivoltaics could meet our national renewable energy targets and save water and create a sustainable long-term food system. The solar panels also help plants grow more efficiently by needing less water. See, plants have an upper limit on how much sun they can actually use. It's called the light saturation point. Beyond that point, any additional sun doesn't increase photosynthesis. It doesn't help the plant grow. It simply increases the plant's water demand. It makes the plants sweat, and it makes them more thirsty. Solar panels can be positioned to allow plants just the right amount of sunlight. And then the excess sunlight can be harvested for electricity and produce more electricity than they would without crops below them. The plants help keep solar panels cool, which makes them more productive. Agrivoltaics is a symbiotic relationship where both the solar panels and the crops benefit because they help each other perform better. The electricity can be used to run the farm with electric tractors and equipment, and to power precision ag technology that helps further reduce water usage. Surplus energy can be stored in battery banks or sent to the grid for consumer use. It's a win-win-win relationship between the three most foundational elements of modern life: food, water, and energy.
Greetings from the International Renewable Energy Agency, and thank you for this opportunity to join this directly engage the youth leaders who will be making the key decisions on policies and innovation that will determine our success as a global community. We at IRENA are fully committed to advancing and accelerating the energy transition. Whether in India, Morocco, France, or Brazil, agrivoltaics is exactly the kind of approach we should all be embracing and supporting, as it checks multiple boxes at the same time, allowing us to harvest solar energy while growing nutritious foods and conserving our limited water resources. COP28 reminds us all of the urgency of acting now, and not just to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but also to rapidly adapt to an already changing climate that's making life increasingly difficult for those in developing countries and in vulnerable communities. At IRENA, we are pushing new policy approaches amongst our member countries, looking to scale up adoption of renewable energy-based innovation and technologies for agri-food systems, including the utilization of renewables-powered cold storage units, solar-powered water pumps, and solar-powered processing techniques that empower local communities, and especially women and the youth. Here at COP28 in Dubai, on the 4th of December 2023, IRENA and the UAE will be formally launching an initiative called Empowering Lives and Livelihood, Renewables for Climate Action, which is designed as a collaborative effort to strengthen resilience and drive equity benefits through renewable energy solutions in health and agri-food value chains. We will call on the international community to get behind this and push them for funding programmatic support to countries. We want to help ensure that the COP28 is a COP for inclusive climate action and that no one is left behind in the energy transition. We still need simplified and affordable access to finance renewable energy projects and an environment that allows de-risking private sector investments. And these are challenges where we need effective collaboration and partnerships for results. I'm pleased that this webinar is a step in the right direction to foster that kind of collaboration. In closing, on behalf of IRENA and its members, let me once again thank the organizers of this webinar and the speakers who have come together here to advance this important topic. I also want to thank and encourage the next generation of student leaders with us today to keep pushing to support these type of innovative, cross-cutting approaches to tackling our most pressing global climate and development challenges. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great way to get us started. Thanks to our friends at IRENA and other multilateral agencies who are helping with the transition to renewable energy, including in the food and agriculture sectors. So with that introduction on agrivoltaics and our message from Deputy DG Singh, let me hand over the floor to Ms. Federica Mattone, a very talented graduate student at Sciences Po University in Paris, from Rome, Italy, who is studying energy and food policy issues, and who is also part of the COP28 task force of the European Youth Energy Network. She'll be moderating the remainder of our webinar. Thank you, Ms. Mattone. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So good morning, everyone. I'm incredibly honored to be with all of you here today. Before we begin, just a quick heads up, given the dynamic and lively atmosphere here, you might hear some background noise during our session on my side, but let's consider it as part of the excitement and energy of being live from the Food Pavilion at COP28 here in Dubai. Now let's dive into our discussion, but before doing so, I will quickly introduce our incredible panel of experts. Firstly, well, you have met our fantastic organizer, Chris Hagedorn, adjunct professor of global food politics at Sciences Po Paris and food systems consultant. Then we have Ms. Kavita Ray, Senior Program Officer of Energy Active at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Then we have Ms. Rima Shresh, Senior Policy and Regulatory Officer at West for Africa Foundation. We then have Mr. Jean Leandro Cano, a dynamic youth leader, Philips representative of the Young Professionals for Agricultural Development, YPART, and Business Development Manager at Nature Tech Innovation Group, Inc. We then have Mr. Sean Declean, Global Food Systems Senior Advisor. And last but not least, Mr. Christian Duprat, a leading senior researcher at the Institut National de la Recherche Agronomique, which is the French National Research Institute. Having said this, I would like to remind our online attendees to please put your questions throughout the webinar in the YouTube chat, and we will address them in the second part of our webinar, which is dedicated to the Q&A session. So without further ado, let's begin with our first question for Christian. So you have extensive experience with agrivoltaics, and I wanted to ask you whether you could please describe to the non-expert lay person the basic concept behind agrivoltaics and detail how it acts as an integrated solution for sustainable food production linked to energy and water. Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning and to share our knowledge about this very new concept, because we are talking about agrivoltaics, but agrivoltaics are developed since about 15 years. So it's a very short time lapse. And I think we have never seen such a new concept emerging that fast. So agrivoltaics is all about sharing the sun, but also sharing the land to improve the productivity of our food and energy systems. And that's something that's very new. This concept is quite new because so far we were thinking about a competition between the two uses of the land. It has a huge potential because if we just only had 1% of the agricultural area in France with agrivoltaics, we would cover all the electricity needs of France, for example. So it has a huge potential. I will share very few slides to just show you what's all about. I hope it works. Yep. So in very brief, I could tell that the concept is coming from the agroforestry concept. When you do agroforestry, you have both trees and crops together to improve the productivity of the land and to bring amenities, to bring advantages. And if you replace the trees with panels, we have agrivoltaics. That's a very simple concept where you produce at the same time electricity and food. This is the historical site in Montpellier in France, where it's probably the first experimental setting in the world, where we worked since 2010, and we have been comparing how the crop would grow below the panels and by contrast to the full sun. And we have been doing that with a variety of crop species to check what was possible or not. You have here a number of different agrivoltaic settings all over Europe with different crops, different type of panels. The panels could be fixed or mobile. They could be, if they move, they could move following the sun, but they could also move and allowing more light for the crop when the crop really need light. But at some time of the years, the crops do not need light, or they would enjoy shade to protect them against heat, drought, or other events. So that's an integrative system that's quite useful and can be useful with animals, with fruit trees, with annual crops, with pastures. So we published for the first time the word of agrivoltaic in this paper. It was 12 years ago, so it's very recent concept. And from what we know at the moment, we are quite sure that we need agrivoltaics in most European countries. What about Africa will be debated later, but at least in Europe, the prospect is that 50% of electricity, of photovoltaic electricity, will be produced on agricultural land by 2050. So that's really an important avenue that we need to explore. Of course, countries with deserts would probably locate PV production in deserts, but deserts are usually far away from the electricity consumers. So if you bring that back, we probably need agrivoltaics everywhere. So a very important improvement in agrivoltaics has been the development of what we call the dynamic agrivoltaism, which is a system where the panels do not follow always the sun to produce electricity, but sometimes we align the panels on the ray of the sun so that there is no shade for the crop, and this increases a lot the productivity of the crops under the system. Of course, you produce less electricity for those periods of time. That's it for a broad introduction, and I think we have systems that have a huge potential to provide renewable electricity for the future, and that's something that we should explore.
So thank you very much, Christian, for your detailed explanation. Clearly, your insights into agrivoltaics have laid a solid foundation for our discussion today. Now, we have heard from the Deputy Director General of IRENA that the agency is committed to advancing and accelerating the energy transition all around the world. And as she mentioned, that of agrivoltaics is the approach that we should be embracing and supporting, given that it checks multiple boxes at the same time. As such, I would like to turn to Kavita and focus on the work that IRENA is doing. In particular, the agency is assisting countries and communities find solutions that blend renewable energy technologies with sustainable production of agri-food and agri-processing. So what is the agency working on, and do you envision any role for agrivoltaics in this work? Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. Thank you also to EIT Food, Sciences Po for letting IRENA speak in this very important topic. We ourselves are pretty new, I think, like the previous speaker has said. The International Renewable Energy Agency, we're based in Abu Dhabi, the headquarters. We've been conducting a lot of analysis on the nexus of agri-food and energy, for the past few years. So all in all, in this sector, we've been quite active. And early this year, in January, we are going like a step further to support all our member countries to develop larger programmatic actions through an initiative that is also being supported by the government of UAE. And we are planning to launch the initiative on the 4th of December at COP28. It's called Empowering Lives and Livelihoods, Renewables for Climate Action. This initiative is really about, building a narrative and an implementation strategy on the ground for the just energy transition, offering like a multi-stakeholder platform where we hope to collaborate with a wide range of stakeholders, and putting specifically, a particular emphasis on these development countries and small island developing states. And we really want youth and women to take an important role so that they can improve their livelihoods. We are currently at various stages of assignments of assessments in about 8 member countries within the initiative, and really to get a deeper understanding of what are the suitable, renewable energy options and solutions and cost estimations are there in key agri-value chains. And that will eventually, hopefully, with each member countries, with the government, private sector, we will design larger programmatic interventions for which we are also seeking funds. And for that, we are also working very closely with the ministries of energy and with the ministries of agriculture and all the associated stakeholders. So in this initiative and in our own work at the agency, we are really technology agnostic. And agrivoltaics is one of the suite of options, obviously, that is starting to emerge. We're really excited. I think I'm really excited, having talked to a few agrivoltaic experts for, preparing for this webinar. And we will probably be engaging, a lot more in the future with different partners to look into this. However, I just wanted to also say that we have an IRENA coalition of action that brings over 140, leading renewable energy players, including private companies, industry associations, civil society, research institutions, to discuss, what are the industry trends and how do you determine actions, share knowledge, information, and best practices. And under this umbrella, one of the key working groups is renewables in agriculture. And they are, luckily for us, I think, looking into agrivoltaics, really looking at lesson learning at the moment on technology, business models, and policy. As we know, I think there's more work on agrivoltaic implementation being done in Europe and elsewhere, but probably less in developing countries. And I think, like India, for example, I know is much ahead in the game compared to other countries. I guess Professor Hecadon will know a lot more on that. But the working groups, is already released a joint statement also along during the UN Food Summit in 2021 to collectively request governments, to break the silos and adopt an integrated approach for strengthening really, water, energy, food nexus. Because often when we work in the energy sector, we tend to work, only within the energy sector. But I think once we step over and we talk to agriculture, I think we need to, do much more deliberations, much more knowledge exchange, much more dialogues with other ministries. And this is something that IRENA is very keen to. And this particular group, is also working on compiling best practices for policy, for technology, business model, and financing, particularly for agrivoltaics. And please look out for that in the future. Thank you, Federica.
Thank you, Kavita, for this overview. I would say that the emphasis on involving LDCs and SIDS, as well as with a significant role for women and youth, underscores the importance of inclusive and integrative approaches when it comes to the energy transition. And building on this notion of inclusivity and critical role of youth, I would like to turn to Jim. So your role as a youth leader and innovator in agri-tech offers a unique perspective, I would say, especially considering that when talking about shaping sustainable food systems and the energy transition, it is crucial to enable and empower young leaders around the world. So could you please share with us, by drawing from your own experience or in your view, what are the aspects, some important aspects of youth engagement when it comes to the promotion and implementation of agrivoltaics? Thank you.
Thanks, Federica. I'll just share my screen and maybe jump off on those for the points of discussion. I think what's very crucial, looking at how young this innovation is and how it's evolving, another aspect or layer to it is also how youth will be engaged and employed along these lines in terms of taking up agrivoltaics and implementing it in their own communities. And I think it's very crucial to look at how youth will be engaged and employed. And I draw from the report that I co-published, I think during the time of Chris at CFS as well, where I was part of the HLPE team that wrote this report on promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. And so one of the key aspects, if you see this illustration on the right, is the foundation or the base really on which these young people are standing on. And these are pretty much the key things that we need to focus on when we want to promote a specific innovation or technology for that matter. And I think one of these really is that looking at the foundations of agency, equity, rights, and recognition as being fundamental, but then looking also at making sure that there are employment opportunities, resources available to them, access to knowledge and innovation. And so these researches that are coming out that would allow and guide these young people to come in is very crucial. But in the same manner, also the environment in which they can play. So for example, if we're looking at young people, when we say young people, it can be very broad, it can be very fluid. In some cultures, it's very different, as what we mentioned in the report. But there are also countries that would say young people as early as 12 or 15, right? And in other countries, you're looking at about 18 or 21. And so depending on cultural context and how we engage young people. So based on that specific context, we also need to have a variety of tools in how we engage and employ young people. So for example, and one of the examples I came into contact while looking out for agrivoltaics and young people is there was one specific project that IEE and I think in America or Latin America did, where they engaged young people as young as grade 8 to actually develop certain robotics or certain IoT applications that would prototype agrivoltaics in their own community. I think it's very interesting to see these kinds of innovations that actually expose young people as early as they can, learn these concepts and also implement it and find solutions. And so that example would be basically this one, where you can find this on YouTube. And this was a full webinar that I actually enjoyed listening throughout. And they looked at young people creating prototypes that actually made, how these mini solar panels would work. And then they implemented in their own school. And so one of the issues that the students saw was the irrigation, because for a very practical reason, the young student didn't want to bring water every how many hours to their garden. So they took the initiative to develop an irrigation system as well that would work closely with that agrivoltaics model that they have in their school. So it's very important to start them young, as early as primary education. When we look at this, we're looking at a whole spectrum of exposing them early, providing them the tools, and then providing the necessary support where they have access to the knowledge, they have access to the tools, even at a small scale, because it doesn't have to be 1,000 hectares right away for a young person, right? We have to build the skills. And I think it's very critical that we have these kinds of stages if we want to look at how young people will be supported and learn about these things. So I think another point, I'm just going to throw a curveball here, is because in my work, I've been trying to transition into how to also work with Gen Z workers, and employees. And I'm not sure if this is pretty only in the Philippines, but I've heard already stories that it's a pretty much global phenomenon where young people are now changing in terms of how they work. And so we have to blend that as well. And I don't have to go through all of this, but basically what Gen Zs are very focused on is a positive culture, mental health and well-being, a sense of purpose and meaning. And so if you talk about agrivoltaics and implementing it in the communities where young people are at, I think it's very crucial for us to think about how that impacts their community, their land. What is the sense of purpose or meaning behind an implementation such as that in their own space? And of course, every generation will have their own personality as well. And I think that's where technological innovations will have to meet there and how we implement that. And so I think this is just for us to kickstart the discussion on how young people can be engaged and employed in agrivoltaics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, for sharing your perspectives. And I would say that the role of youth in advancing agrivoltaics and your experience clearly highlight how young leaders are driving innovative and sustainable solutions in food systems and energy transitions. And with this emphasis on innovation and sustainability, it's a natural progression to our next speaker, Sean. So, Sean, you understand very well the complexities of the global food system and the importance of more holistic approaches to sustainable farming. And in Africa, where you're working with both the private sector and countries on strengthening innovation ecosystem, could you speak to how agrivoltaics are relevant to African food producers? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm actually in Rwanda at the moment, and it's quite exciting when you talk about innovation because they're setting themselves up as an innovation prototype hub for the continent, and that's exactly actually what you need if you're going to drive a revolution around agrivoltaics. I think in the Africa context, I mean, if this is new in terms of what is being presented in the international context, it's very new in terms of the Africa context, and so you're just seeing some of those early research efforts underway. I think it was just earlier this year in Kenya, there was a project launched in Kajiado County, I think with University of Sheffield, together with the World Agroforestry Centre. It was interesting, even with just those early results, just in horticulture, the cabbages that were grown there, I mean, they used half the amount of water and were probably about a third of the size bigger than they were, and so they've just been testing it out in horticulture at the moment, and then obviously to look at some of the other crops as is being done in the US and in Europe. The challenge in Africa is going to be what we're hearing, which is quite exciting, and you're hearing it on this panel, is to really unlock that potential, to take that to scale. And there's a huge potential in Africa to do that, because not only does this, does this help to feed the continent, and if Africa is not feeding itself, the world is not going to be feeding itself going forward. It also helps, at a continental level where there is limited electricity in rural areas, and so actually the access to electricity, low carbon electricity particularly, and the crossover there, and that whole water, food, energy nexus is critical. Having said that, and what you're hearing is, if we don't break the silos, if we treat this as an energy specific issue, then this is going to remain a conversation that happens amongst energy players. And I'll give you an example of that in South Africa at the moment. South Africa is going through a massive transition around electricity, to shift from coal based electricity to looking at solar and wind, and yet there has hardly been a conversation. So huge conversations around how to bring in renewable energy. A lot of work going on, a lot of innovative financing, and yet interestingly enough, I'm involved in a project there to fast track the idea of bringing agriculture together with renewable energy, together with agriculture, because this conversation has not happened. These sectors have historically not worked together. And so in a way we need to, and that's just an example of an opportunity at scale where we need to break the silos, really aggressively look to break the silos. I think
Sean, I think you have muted yourself just 2 seconds ago.
Sorry, I hit my mouse in the excitement of the moment there. Thank you for telling me. And so Kavita talked about an integrated approach, and it is going to require, as I'm saying, that sort of integrated approach. The other part of that integrated approach is building up that dynamic innovation ecosystem. That that innovation ecosystem, creating agrivoltaic innovation hubs in different countries that can really crowd in the kind of innovation that's talking about. For what Jim was saying, if we're going to bring in youth in Africa, Africa will be the youngest continent population-wise by a long way, and the need to create jobs in this space and innovative thinking around those jobs is going to be critically important. But to do that, as Jim very eloquently put, you've got to build that whole ecosystem, starting young, starting at primary school, starting at high schools, bringing them in, creating innovation hubs in areas that bring together knowledge, capacity, policy reform, innovative financing. And that's the final piece that I'll look at. We need to really get ahead on the innovative financing mechanisms, the sort of blended financing mechanisms that are going to be needed if we're going to take agrivoltaics to scale. So break the silos, think about innovation in a dynamic way, innovation hubs, innovative financing, and really taking a sort of integrated approach at scale.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yeah, I would say indeed working with a diversity of stakeholders and breaking silos really brings to light the multifaceted approach that is required when we are talking about agrivoltaic systems. And to expand our discussion to the broader context of creating supporting environments, I would pass the word to Rima. In particular, we have delved into various aspects of the nexus between food, energy, and water. And I was wondering whether you could offer your insights as to what a proper enabling environment for the adoption of agrivoltaic solutions would look like. And if possible, share specific examples where progress is being made. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Federica. It's a delight to be here at this webinar. So yes, the agrivoltaic has been for the past 15 years as a pilot project happening here and there around the world. But in the last 5-7 years, we've noticed something more, something that it looks like the countries are willing to take this agrivoltaic and make it happen, deploy it around the country. So the first thing we did in Rest for Africa, we looked at all the best practices of agrivoltaics happening around the world in order to understand what is needed to deploy agrivoltaics in 7 countries around the Mediterranean, North African country, Morocco, Tunis, Algeria, Libya, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon. And in order to understand what is needed, so after testing, after a pilot project here and there, what is needed? In our best practice, we looked at 17 countries deploying agrivoltaics, and some of them, we noticed that the majority the deployment of agrivoltaic happened only when there was a political commitment for that. France, the United States, Germany, Japan, among others, have politically declared their interest in the agrivoltaics to boost renewable energy production, but also looking at the benefits of co-locating solar and crop production. And following, after the political commitment took place, we start seeing that the agrivoltaics has been defined in the sense, what is agrivoltaics? How do we, what is it? Is it co-locating the land for the favoring the sun or favoring the crops? For instance, the French Environment and Energy Management Agency, ADEME, published a series of documents defining the agrivoltaics. For instance, they defined it as a PV system where models are located on the same surface of agriculture production, to which they bring the following services without causing a significant qualitative and quantitative degradation of the farm yield, as well as the reduction of the revenues generated from the farming activities. In this definition, somehow France emphasized on the synergy between the agriculture and PV production on the same land. And also, beyond the definition, there is a need to define the requirements in the national context. Each country, Italy, France, US, define the requirement differently. In France, for instance, they said that it must imply the presence of the farmer. So the farmer is a key actor in defining and deploying the agrivoltaic. Is not like we are leasing the land of agriculture land for PV as it had happened in the past 25 years. The second thing important, we noticed that it started being introduced in the national strategies and plan. Japan, South Korea, Italy recognized agrivoltaics in their mid-long-term national plans and strategies. In Italy, they introduced it in the National Recovery and Resilience Strategy, PNRR, which support the green transition as a whole, but it dedicated 1.10 billion euros for the agrivoltaics, with specifying the requirement, defining it, defining even the targets that the agrivoltaics need to achieve by 2025. And the last thing we noticed on the policy level, that agrivoltaics has been also integrated in the energy policies, tools, regulations, and laws. Before we saw that the energy policies, laws, regulation has mentioned the PV allocation, where it can be dedicating the zoning areas. Now we can see in several countries like Germany, France, US, Taiwan, Japan, that they started even mentioning the agrivoltaics in the energy policies, and also, for instance, they introduced it in the feed-in tariff to expand the renewable energy deployment, and looking at the solar energy in particular. In Germany, they categorized it under the Renewable Energy Act as a special solar system and made them available for funding via solar innovation tenders with a capacity beyond 750 kilowatt. In Germany also, the operators operating an agrivoltaics could have priority to access to the grid, because at the end, when deploying an agrivoltaic, yes, we need to think of the land, have the farmer and the crop production maintained, but at the same time, we need to have connection to the grid, because this renewable energy need to be distributed to the community in a way. So we saw these three things, and without those, political commitment, national strategy, policies, and also connection to the grid and deployment, a major deployment of the agrivoltaics is hard to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rima. Well, your examples from the Mediterranean region and insights into best practices globally, such as the integration of agrivoltaics in national strategy, as well as the introduction of regulations and incentives, offer a clear blueprint for what effective government commitment and policymaking can achieve in this field. And building on this understanding of the policy and strategic frameworks that can facilitate the deployment of agrivoltaics, we return to Christian, whose initial insights had laid the groundwork for our understanding of agrivoltaics. So considering the various aspects that we have covered thus far, and your extensive practical research on the use of agrivoltaics, could you delve into why the uptake of such a promising technology is moving so slowly? Is it a question of research, policy, or investment models?
Thank you, Federica. I would not say that the uptake is that slow, because it's so recent, it's so new, that I would say it's moving quite fast. And as Rima said, it's most of the time a question of policy. I will share my screen again, if you allow me for that. Here it is. We have, we are back to there. Okay. We have a strong debate about agrivoltaics, because we have to be sure that the agricultural production of the land will remain viable, will remain rewardable for the farmer. And one of the key issues is about what we call the ground coverage ratio of the system. It's simply the area of PV panels divided by the area of land where the panels are mounted. If you have a low ground coverage ratio, you have a very productive agricultural production because you have a lot of sun for the crops. But this low ground coverage ratio will result in a higher cost of the electricity that may endanger the electricity business model of the companies who are bringing the panels. So my guess is that the search for low-cost structures to support low ground coverage ratio in agrivoltaics will be crucial in the future. We had in the past some very detrimental aspects, such as this one. This one is about photovoltaic glass houses. They were developed during the past 10 years all over Europe, especially in France and Italy. And in most of the time, there were too many PV panels on the rooftop of the glass houses, and it was too dark for the crops, so the production was not viable, and the farmers quit farming. And this has had a very bad impact on the idea of agrivoltaics. At the moment, we are developing new systems with lower ground coverage ratios for those glass houses that work much better. So you have the pictures on the right-hand side of your screen. And this is quite important not to do this mistake again with agrivoltaics. And this is the only graph I will show you. So just allow me to explain that. This figure shows you how the crop relative yield, which is the yield divided by the reference yield when you have no panels, is decreasing when you increase the density of PV panels. So you have a decrease, a sharp decrease. And if you go to 50% ground coverage ratio, which is the usual density of panels in a ground-mounted PV facility, you have a strong decrease in the crop yield. Of course, there are exceptions, but I think the average is important if you want to design a policy. So the question at the moment in Europe and all over the world is, what do we allow for ground coverage ratio of agrivoltaic systems? Do we accept that the crop yield will decrease, or don't we accept that? So usual ground-mounted PV ground coverage ratio are not compatible with agrivoltaics. There are some exceptions. A model when you have 100% of relative yield, which is the dream for everybody, would allow you to have an infinite area to be available for agrivoltaics, but that's not easy to achieve that. If you divide the ground coverage ratio by 2 and you put the panels on twice the area, you have the same electricity production. But you have a higher cost of the electricity produced. And maybe some crops will benefit more from the shade. So we have experiments showing that fruit trees, vineyards, berries, pastures may tolerate more shade, but we need more data to prove that. So that's not still exactly defined, but for the future, we may have dual agrivoltaic systems. Not only, we may have large facilities, large arrays, large solar farms. There will be in a limited number, close to the grid connection points to provide electricity on the grid. They will have a low cost of electricity, thanks to economies of scale, and there could be a very significant contribution to the electricity mix. But we could have also small facilities, small agrivoltaic systems that will benefit to many more people all over the territory, especially in Africa. They can be installed in remote areas, far away from the national grid connection points. The electricity cost will be higher, but if you don't have electricity at your place, it's always very interesting. They will release the tension on the distribution grid by providing electricity at the remote end of the delivery network. And they are compatible with self-consumption models, with farm decarbonation, with the introduction of electric tractors, with the production of nitrogen fertilizer on the farm, and so and so. So those are some options for the future. And I think policy is the key in industrialized countries where we have a fierce competition for the land between agriculture and energy production. Maybe the scene is quite different in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian, for your exploration into, let's say, the technicalities behind the agrivoltaic technology. And building on this theme, we now turn back to Kavita to further examine the policy realm. So zooming in on policies, what sort of impediments do you think are hindering, let's say, the growth of this technology?
Thank you, Federica, for that question. I think Rima and Christian have already covered a lot of the points that I wanted to say as well. You know, like the nexus of food, land, and energy, it's often very complicated, especially in developing countries, right, where regulations and policies still need to be forwarded a lot. And in many ways, we know that photovoltaics can always prove to be a blessing, as if there are underutilized land that can be used effectively through this technology. However, it may not be always that straightforward, right? Let me take an example from Nepal, where I'm originally from, where the government policies just do not allow arable land to be utilized for the development of solar projects. Thus, the convergence, you know, of different sectoral policies is needed. And I think Rima, mentioned it before, that there needs to be more dialogues, you know, or more interministerial coordination between the ministries of agriculture and between the ministries of energy. This is something, for example, that we, under the Empowering Lives and Livelihoods initiative, is really working on, is how do we create more interministerial coordination. It's a tough job, but I think we're starting, and it's starting to work well. Also, I think in terms of agrivoltaics, you know, it makes more economical sense or financial sense at the moment because it's at early stages, and that projects really need to be on scale. So I've talked to, you know, implementers who've done small scale agrivoltaics, and the cost of the small scale agrivoltaics are really high. And especially if you do these sort of projects in non-arable land, that means, you know, technology and design considerations may need to be addressed, such as, you know, the height of the systems. And I think Christian was talking about this as well. And that raises the project cost. And this is particularly, you know, when we talk of decentralized agrivoltaic system, therefore, you know, policy considerations must be there. So there needs to be some sort of subsidies or some sort of grants, so that you know, the technology can be advanced. In addition, you know, there is possibly in many developing countries in Africa, even in South Asia, there's so little experience on it that, you know, and very less data on what is the optimum size of an agrivoltaic system that maybe should be considered, even if there was a subsidy policy, for example, or an incentive that needs to be set. You know, this sort of research data on actual projects are required, right? And until we do that, I think it'll be very difficult to frame really strong policy decisions, at least for the policy makers. And of course, we have, you know, the usual tax breaks for installations of such systems that needs to be considered. So government and, you know, governments and policymakers, you know, they set renewable energy targets, right, for impacting the sector and the economy and the sustainable livelihoods of these people. So it may be challenging if this group of stakeholder is unaware of what the benefits of agrivoltaics are. And thus, you know, I think information provision, knowledge exchange will be needed, you know, simultaneously, of course, with the farmers as well. That's an aspect, you know, that is on the other side. And obviously successful pilot programs will need to provide more confidence, you know, for the policymakers to design specific standards, regulations, and incentives for the growth of the industry. So, for example, incentives can be set through subsidies and grants, you know, can be set through tax credits, feed-in tariffs. There could be crop insurance, you know, premium on solo crop, among others. And it's equally important to have standards that needs to be set for putting up the structure for installations for the agrivoltaic system and for solar-based irrigation, because often these are also combined, as I can see. And of course, you know, regulations are often underrated in many developing countries. I think this is very, very important because especially when you implement projects, you know, regulations often come and can be a barrier and an impediment. And these are needed, both for land usage, because we're talking obviously of agriculture, and also for electricity, for the solar PV itself. What are the tariffs? What are the metering? Can there be also, certification of solar crops? So there's a whole range of, incentives that that governments or can provide. There needs to be standards. There needs to be regulations. All of these, I think, needs further work. And all this is obviously possible without, appropriate information and capacity building, not only for, the government, but also to work simultaneously with farmers and industry players. I think this is very important. And Christian also mentioned about, financing institutions. And at IRENA, I think we're within our own Empowering Lives and Livelihoods initiative, we're really trying to take an ecosystem approach. That policy by itself is not enough, that we really need to work with industry players. We need to work with financial institutions. We need to work with, people on the ground, with smallholder farmers. And hopefully, if we can tackle all of them at one time, then probably the impact will be a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavita. I would say that your point about the need for supportive policies and practical considerations in different contexts brings us to a related on-the-ground perspective. And I believe it's relevant to bring in the perspective of someone who operates at the intersection of policy and industry. I'm referring to Jim. So as someone who straddles between policy work as a youth in agriculture advocate and who works in the private sector of the industry, could you share with us whether there are Agrivoltaics implementations in the Philippines? And if so, how do you see it progressing? And what do you think are critical factors in venturing into Agrivoltaics projects in your country? Thank you.
Thanks, Federica. I think looking at the points being raised, and you see how advanced in some parts of the world in terms of understanding agrivoltaics is, I think putting it into context of where a developing country is, like the Philippines is in, is very crucial if we are to adopt and implement this technology of agrivoltaics. I think looking at how an innovation goes into a context of a developing country also has that, as Kavita mentioned, that food, energy, and water nexus is a very complicated, the spheres can go and intersect and can be really, really hard to navigate in some cases. And I think that's where the food security aspect, as well as the energy demand and energy supply kind of a reality on the ground, becomes a challenge for communities. And so I think the point that was raised on tapping into industry partners is very crucial, because they're the ones, especially in terms of this kind of technology, the cost can be very steep. And so you cannot expect smallholder farmers to actually put out the capital needed to implement these kinds of things. And there has to be that coordinated support that comes from either government subsidies or grants, or grants from either donors or government, and also industry coming in together with that. And in that case, I think it's very crucial to have that kind of collaboration to actually implement this. So taking off on that, I'm just going to share my screen of some pictures that I've seen, and then also what we intend to do in our own company by next year, which we're ramping up preparations for. So initially, this is this is a company in the Philippines, not where I'm connected to or whatsoever, but this is a well-known company in the country that is basically a conglomerate of real estate, banking, telecommunications, and power. And they have one specific energy corporation that is ASIN. And they have various solar farms already around the country. They also own facilities across Southeast Asia. And recently, specifically last year, they started already implementing what they call solar gulayan. Gulayan is a Filipino term. Basically, it translates vegetable farm or vegetable production area. And so the person that you see on the right with the squash is actually from their own solar farm here in one of the provinces here in Luzon, or which is the main northern island group, I mean. And they're actually planning to implement these solar farms across there's this solar gulayan across their solar plants. And in their actually latest report, they actually intend to migrate all of their portfolio, the energy portfolio, into solar or renewable projects. So I think they've already gone away from the coal producing plants that they have. They only have a little bit of diesel powered plants that they have left, but they're all migrating into solar and wind, of which I think they're also implementing this solar gulayan. What is interesting though is that when you read the report though on how much that was produced from the year that they started implementing this solar vegetable farm, is that they've only produced 1,700 kilos of vegetables. So that brings us to the point that Christian was saying a while ago in terms of the ratio, and looking at how much are we intending to aim for. This one is coming from the perspective of them being an electrical energy company, basically. So the electric business model would definitely be the highlight of the model that they want to implement. So looking at how that's going to change on a case-to-case basis, we're going to have to see like what is the ratio, what is the balance of food security, energy supply that we're going to see in the mix, and that's very critical, and how we're going to see that implemented in different aspects. Now, from this part here, going to the next slide, this one is very much looking at producing and generating electricity from this hybrid kind of approach. But most of the solar implementations that we've seen here in the Philippines is mostly because in the rice fields we see solar pumps. They're not targeted towards producing electricity really, because one of the very practical needs that farmers actually are looking for is access to irrigation and having enough energy to actually power the pumps that bring these irrigation systems to their fields. So you're looking at here on the left side, there's a private farm owner that discussed that he had spent about 80,000 pesos, which is roughly $1,450. That would cover 7 hectares plot of rice land. Now, on the right side, you see a government initiated project from the National Irrigation Authority that it's a solar pump for irrigation that would cover 24 hectares. So most of the solar related agriculture implementations you'd see here in the country really focuses in on more of the helping out on the food security side, production side of it. And you see that from the previous slide, the industry players are the ones that are really they have the more leg room to kind of like implement these innovative solutions such as agrivoltaics, where you have energy production and food production in the same manner. Now, I come to this last slide, which is basically what we're intending to do and we're ramping up preparations for, is that the small picture would show the red part was where the province where we intend to implement our project. We're working with the provincial government up north of the Philippines, and this province is known to be the hottest province throughout the year. They can get the highest average temperatures in the Philippines, and so that has a very high opportunity for solar energy production as well. So what's interesting is because our company is an agricultural company, but its sister company is also a real estate company. And that real estate company is also working with the government's program of developing vertical socialized housing projects for governments, for local government units. Now, one of the technologies that we've tapped into, or at least we've already negotiated with, is the one here in the middle you see in the picture, is a Dutch technology called PowerNest. And it's basically a solar and wind energy solution that you put on top of a building. So it generates energy from the solar and also from wind. Now, because of the nature of our real estate company's plan to do vertical socialized housing, this is what they intend to put on top of the buildings that would generate the energy required for that community. In the same manner, the group of companies would see it actually as a powerhouse for us to power the other necessary activities in the farming space. So for us, we're actually going to be doing integrated sweet potato and peanut production, and we're going to do processing of sweet potato into flour and chips and all these things. And so to augment the need for energy, we're also going to be drawing out from the energy that will be generated from these power nest solutions that are implemented. So I think those are some of the implementations that we see. But what we really see is that in terms of how it's going to progress, we're going to see a lot of industry players taking the lead because they have the capacity to actually venture into these things. When it goes into the community, it's going to be a very case-to-case basis, which will need a lot of government and industry support as well. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Jim. I would quickly shift to another yet important geographical context by turning to Sean. So knowing what you know about African economies and politics, as well as sustainable financing, what actions can African institutions and governments take to substantially scale up agrivoltaics to support national transition pathways for food systems and help smallholder farmers to be part of the transition to sustainable production?
Thanks, Federica. So I'm just going to build very much on what the last two speakers, Kavisha and Jim, said, because I think they said it probably a lot more eloquently than I will, in the sense that from a government perspective, what's going to be critical to address the whole food, water, energy nexus is that interministerial coordination. And so how you affect that, particularly around, say, the more narrow subset of that, which is agrovoltaics, because it will require that ecosystem approach to policy building, so that this doesn't negatively affect smallholder farmers in particular. And I think Jim said it very well, that you can see a very clear pathway for industry to do this at scale if the incentives and the financing dynamics are right. But if you're going to bring this down to a community level, to a smallholder farmer level, it's going to require quite active government engagement and intervention to make sure that particularly that the smallholder farmer voice is included right from the outset, that the policy framework is there, that the graduation models are there to allow, you know, the testing of this at an initial stage, and then to expand that. And then, as I said earlier, the critical need to build an innovation ecosystem and to put the framework. I can't underscore that enough, just how important it is to build these innovation ecosystems that really respond to community needs, particularly in the African context, because this is going to require if it's just left to industry, that's a specific pathway, and that could work very well from an investment case. But if we're going to involve communities at large, it is going to require a really comprehensive understanding around multi-stakeholder partnerships, how you facilitate those, how you bring those about, how you build that capacity at the local, regional and county level to develop and support this sort of multi-stakeholder partnership approach, because it doesn't just happen by itself simply because you've got a good idea. It requires real curated support and active intervention to make that happen. So that it's going to require a really dynamic approach to community building, bringing communities in from the outset and smallholder farmers in from the outset to really inform that policy environment.
Thank you very much, Sean. I would say that this sets an important context for our next and last question for Rima. So assuming that the appropriate policies and strategies are in place, is that sufficient, or are there additional elements that are needed for successful implementation and scaling of agrivoltaics? Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. Allow me first to just define, kind of put some lights on what Jim has shared. So to address the water, energy, food nexus, there are several business models like solar irrigation, solar pumping, and so on. The agrivoltaics is a bit a concept that goes further, that is dual use of the land, which means that using the same agriculture land for energy production as well as crop production. And Sean mentioned something very interesting, is the multi-stakeholder partnerships as well as financing instruments. Now, in our research, we noticed that the majority of the donors, World Bank, EBRD, African Development Bank, they deploy funds for solar installations, for solar energy, but without taking into consideration that the land usually is leased for 30 years. The agriculture lands are usually leased for 30 years. And this is where agrivoltaics come in and say, we have a chance to keep funding flowing for PV, but still consider the land. And this brings me to the additional elements that are needed to be considered when we are thinking of agrivoltaics, whether in Europe, but also in Africa, North Africa. It is the dual use of the land. So when we look at the agrivoltaics, we look at the energy laws, agriculture laws, but also the land laws. Land laws, to date, they don't allow the dual use of the land. And it is with the decrees and law, secondary legislations, that they specify in some countries like Japan and South Korea to what extent you use the agriculture land and how many years for also deploying the PV on it. For instance, South Korea grants 8 years for temporary use of farmland. And also Japan granted 7 years. But usually those secondary legislations or acts, they don't consider the lifespan of the solar PV, which usually is 25 years. In other words, we put on a farmland 25 years lifespan solar PV installation, and then after 7 years we have to consider taking them out. So even here the laws need to be considering, yes, the crop production, the farmland use, the environment of it, at the same time come closer to a lifespan of a solar PV that is Christian mentioned the LCOE, the cost of it, whether it's for small PV installation or large scale. So we don't waste. It's like in the sustainable deployment of agrivoltaic, we are not throwing the PV after 7-8 years. Another element is the law says the farmer is at the heart of the discussion, but to date we see only the energy utility that are pushing for the deployment of the agrivoltaics. And this brings me always to think, does the farmer knows what it takes to have agrivoltaics on its land? So we need more research on that. We need more awareness campaign to the farmer, like in order to have agrivoltaic, you need this, you need that paper, this is the process, this is where you and the energy utility are applying together for it. And the third thing that brings to my, when an agreement between the energy utility and the farmer takes place, the agreement, usually it is longer than 7 years, but let's say the agreement is not always granting the farmer, like if we consider that we have a flood and on this farmland, the farmer lost its crop, who's gonna pay for that? Is it the energy utility? Is it the government? Is it the region? Is it because the energy utility will always benefit from the sun, will always have electricity connected to the grid, and here the farmer need to be protected. So even agreements between the utility and the farmer need to be protecting the crops and protecting the farmers. And the last thing is about social acceptance. The farmer, the society, the agrivoltaics is to date known for the researchers and the energy utility, and less on the farmers, because the farmers around the world, they think the solar agrivoltaics is putting solar on the agriculture land to do irrigation or to power my farm. But we saw some really nice examples, like in France, when they created the Agrivoltaics Association, which brings together more than 10,000 representatives from the industry, from the government, from the investors, researchers, farmers, cooperatives, is where the dialogue happens and where the deployment of the agrivoltaics will be more sustainable because it has been socially accepted. In Italy, there is the Associazione Italiana Agrivoltaico Sostenibile, also an association that brings forward the dialogue on the agrivoltaics as a WEF Nexus solution, sustainable solution. So I think if we have the policies, if we have the government willingness to deploy it, we have the financing instruments, we have also to consider that the donors sometimes, those who have the money, where they can deploy it in Africa, Asia, Europe, that we need to consider the agrivoltaics part of the solution for PV deployment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima, for what I would say is a very holistic picture. Clearly, the need for dual land use, the importance of setting financing instruments and incentives, the pivotal role for social acceptance, especially among farmers, energy producers, and society, highlights the multifaceted nature of agrivoltaics. So as we wrap up, I would say it's clear that agrivoltaics represent a convergence of solutions for the water, food, and energy nexus. And this discussion has clearly shown that food and energy security are not competing objectives, but rather, when approached holistically, they can enhance the resilience of both systems. And before closing, I would ask each of you a maximum 30-second takeaway from this session. And I ask you to be as concise as possible so that everyone can get his time. Thank you. We can start with. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. There is a big risk in agrivoltaics because the electricity revenue is 10 to 100 times higher than the crop or the pasture or the farm revenue on the same land. So we need to protect the farmers, because if we don't do that, electricity will win everywhere and the farmers will be taken out. So regulation is key, respect the farmer is key, and this is the only way that we will not put havoc in the countryside, because the few farmers that will get the electricity facility on their land, they will become annuitants, they will do nothing and earn a lot of money, and this is inequality in the countryside. So this is a danger of agrivoltaics. We need to manage that.
Thank you. Jim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think it's very crucial, especially from someone coming from this context in the Philippines. It's a very interesting innovation, something that we can really look at how we can implement here in our own space in our backyard, especially with the country having a lot of sunlight. I think the challenge really is to balance that approach in terms of how do we manage expectations, how do we manage risk at the community level. And then I think one of the promising aspects is that if laws are actually as progressive as they can be, then we'll be able to see something that benefits the different stakeholders in this picture. And on the last note, I think it's really crucial to highlight also, how do we prepare the next generation or young people to have the necessary capacity and skills to actually adopt this kind of technology at the community level.
Thank you. Remind with Sean.
My takeaway will be on the water, energy, food crisis. In order to address it, whether through agrivoltaics or through other concepts, we need to stop move on from thinking with a tunnel vision. And what Sean mentioned about the silo approach, to kind of have an integrated approach of policy design, policy dialogue, and so on. And also, it's not we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Agrivoltaics is a perfect example. PV installation has been running for the past 30 years and even more. So we don't really need to reinvent. We need to think from another lens. And the last thing is the agrivoltaic must happen in complete coherence and synergy with the national context, with the community. So learning from the past, let's not take a solution that looked and worked perfectly in Europe and place it in Africa, the same in Asia and America. So when we are deploying agrivoltaic, let's look at the local context, local agriculture, crops, local community, and embed a natural evolution of the agrivoltaic system in the country in the way that it suits them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, but not least, Sean.
So, I mean, given the state of the sort of concurrent crisis that we're facing around climate change, nature, and food at the moment, if in many ways winning slowly is actually losing in this case, and agrivoltaics is one of those opportunities that allows us to really rethink the way that we do that. But it will require a fairly radical understanding around collaboration, around multi-stakeholder collaboration, particularly right down to the community level, not just at the national level. It does require that integrated policy approach. It's absolutely key. It does require sort of building in and crowding people in from the beginning, a real inclusivity. And finally, it really requires to sort of create these dynamic innovation hubs that work at a country specific and even at a community level. And we need to really drive that in a way that brings the youth particularly with us, as Jim was saying there. So, but great panel, really informative, you know, some great science and some great thinking. So great to be part of it. Thank you. And thanks to Sciences Po for organizing this, and to the EIT Food for the hub.
Thank you very much to everyone. We truly look forward to keep working with you. And I wish you a good continuation of your day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.